Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Analysing Anfield with myself, Keifer, MacDonald and Beth, Lindop. Beth, we're back. It's been a while. I think April was the last episode we did. How are you doing?
Yeah, it feels like a lifetime since we last did one of these. So excited to get stuck in. It feels like it's sort of the calm before the storm at the minute, doesn't it? And I'm sure sort of once the transfer window opens and everything sort of kicks into action, it'll be very busy.
Absolutely. It feels like it's a bit of a weird time, kind of a bit of empty space at the moment with Liverpool. Obviously, there's been a new managerial appointment. Obviously, Jurgen Klopp's left. There's been plenty of tears shed, but it feels like now we're looking forward to a new era, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does. It sort of feels weird to imagine Liverpool without Jurgen Klopp. I mean, I was 15 when he came to the club, so my adult life, he's all I've known at Liverpool, and obviously same for you as well. So yeah, it will be weird. It'd be weird seeing someone else in the dugout next season, but sometimes change can be good, and you know, it's been nice seeing Jurgen over the last few weeks at the Champions League final and on his Instagram as well. He's been
looking very tan.
Yeah, looking very tan, looking very chilled and relaxed, and it must feel like a massive weight off his shoulders not to have to deal with all the stresses that come with managing Liverpool. So yeah, excited. I think it can be good sometimes to get a new perspective on things, so looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And before we get into today's episode and delving into maybe what that inventory list looks like for our new slot, we'll give a shout out to today's sponsors, NordVPN. Go to NordVPN/Blood Red or use our link in the description, which gives you 4 extra months on a 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money back guarantee. The link can be found in the YouTube or the podcast description. So now that's out of the way, Beth, we're going to have a little delve into a keep sell loan of kind of the players that slot will be assessing at the start of next month when the players return to pre-season. Firstly, you know, I think the two big hitters who have had a lot of speculation about their future is Luis Diaz and Darwin Nunez. I think obviously Diaz has come out, I think after Colombia's game last night or the other night, and said that he's focused on Liverpool and you know he's really happy. But I think there has been a few murmurings behind the scenes of maybe PSG obviously having lost Kylian Mbappe and Barcelona as well. I mean, I'm not sure how the finances of that deal would work. But where do you kind of stand on Luis Diaz? It feels like it's been a bit of an up and down season for him. I think the turn of the year he was really good and one of Liverpool's better players. But then I think we saw, you know, a dip towards the end of the season. I think it was only 1 goal in his last, you know, or 1 assist, I think, in his last 10 Premier League games. And I think ultimately, you know, a lot of talk was about Nunez and Liverpool not finishing their chances. But I think he'll be someone who maybe has to shoulder some of that responsibility as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it did really feel like toward the end of the season there was some real noise about him leaving the club. I think that seems to have settled a little bit. I know we're not really fully into transfer season yet, but yeah, there did seem to be a little bit of substance in some of those rumours about him leaving, and I was maybe quite indifferent to it really, because I think Diaz, he came into the club in that first half of the season that he had after joining from Porto. He was excellent, wasn't he? And he looked like a real find for Liverpool. Obviously came in for, you know, a decent chunk of money, but in today's market, you know, maybe not necessarily a lot, and really impressed. And it sort of felt, you know, obviously he was hampered a lot by injury, wasn't he, last season? And collectively the team weren't performing particularly well. So, you know, he's not had the easiest ride over the last sort of 12, 18 months. Obviously, has the most horrendous sort of personal circumstances to deal with his dad prior to the new year. So he's had a few sort of turbulent things going on off the pitch, which I suppose has made life a bit more tricky for him on the pitch. I think if he could add a few more goals to his game, I think he'd be exceptional. I think there were so many games last season where, you know, you just saw him sort of take someone on, and he just had a flash of brilliance about him.
The City game at Anfield was kind of the prime example of that. He kind of had everything but the end product.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if he can add a few more goals to his game, if he can get that end product, then he's a real threat and a real asset for Liverpool. I mean, how old is he now? 27?
27, he'll turn 28.
So he's sort of at that point now where as a player you're looking to sort of be at the peak of your powers, aren't you, really? So my one sort of slight concern with him is I think that sort of explosive nature that he had when he first came to the club, it's maybe not been as consistent. As you said, that Manchester City game was an example where he was brilliant in that game, and he burnt Kyle Walker a couple of times, didn't he? And I'd like to see him do that a little bit more. I think if the right money came in for him, then it's definitely one that you'd have to look at. But again, Barcelona seems to be certainly the destination that his dad is keen on him going to. If some of his interviews are to be taken at face value, but we know obviously financially they're not in the best position. So PSG is the obvious candidate. If they were to come in and offer, I don't know, 60, 70 million, then you'd have to really consider it. But then you also have to look at what's out there, and obviously Liverpool's scouting department will be looking at other options on the wing and things like that. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I think if the price was right, he's someone that I would be open to moving on, but I'd also be equally happy with him staying at the club, providing he can maybe, add a few more goals and assists to his game. Absolutely.
I mean, he's just having a look here. He's got a contract until 2027. It feels like it's a decisive summer in one way or another. I think he's probably at that stage where he wants a new contract. He probably thinks he's warranted that since he has come to Liverpool, as you say, that first half season that he had, and he was kind of instrumental in Liverpool's late push for the quadruple, wasn't he? And you think how good that front three was that season. Obviously Mane was playing down the centre. Obviously then you had Salah and even Jota. I always find it mental that Jota scored 21 goals that season and didn't start the Champions League final, and that is just kind of a measure of how good Diaz was and how big his impact was. And then it's weird because you look at this, last season he obviously did his ACL. It was a knee injury, and obviously then did that again. He was out for most of the season. I think he returned in April, and then, as you said, this season just then he's obviously had the things off the field. So it kind of feels like, even though we've had him for 2.5 years, we haven't really had a full uninterrupted kind of pure Luis Diaz. And maybe that kind of goes against him in some people's minds, where people are saying, well, I'm kind of in the camp of, similar to yourself, where I wouldn't look to actively lose him, but I think if someone came in with the right money, as you say, and the right offer, I don't think he's in that bracket of kind of irreplaceable or someone you'd be on your hands and knees begging to stay. I think it could potentially suit all parties, but if he's happy and as he says today, he's content at Liverpool, you just really hope, I think, the next season he can make that push and maybe add some more goals to his games, and maybe. I always think of Mane when he arrived from Southampton. At Southampton, he was a player he kind of got in the right positions. He had kind of all the right attributes, but he wasn't really too decisive in the final third. And if XG was a thing back then, I would have liked to see how that kind of compared. And it maybe feels like Diaz is like that. He hasn't had that kind of explosive season that Mane has had. Or Mane did have at Liverpool, and made that step up. And I think Klopp said that a few times, that he did challenge him to maybe add more numbers to his game, but. I mean, you talk about that. Even if he was to add, 5 goals and 5 assists to his game, that's another player who's going to finish the season with 20 goals and probably 30 goal contributions altogether. So he could be a real asset to Arne Slot next season, can't he?
Yeah, I think Liverpool are in a really luxurious position. I mean, I don't know actually in terms of the rest of the Premier League, but there can't be many clubs, I think, in European football that have all 5 forward options registering more than 10 goals in all competitions. That is a real testament to how good Liverpool's forward options are as a collective, as an attacking unit. I think everyone is sort of judged through the lens of the last few months of the season. Obviously, it was a disappointing end when it looked like they were on course to maybe even clinch a quadruple, not back in March. So it's difficult because I think he's judged as well sort of by the barometer of Sadio Mane and how good he was for the club, and I think anyone coming in is going to have a difficult job on the hands trying to live up to what Mane was able to produce. I do think as well we're going to probably see a little bit of a shift for Liverpool over the next couple of years with Mo Salah, and in terms of the last 7 seasons that he's been at the club, he has been the main goal scorer. Obviously Mane's been up there with him in a couple of seasons, but by and large, he has been the main provider of goals for Liverpool. And, whether he stays beyond next summer, whether he stays beyond this summer, I mean, I think it's looking like he probably will at this moment in time. But you'd imagine his influence, his impact on the team is maybe going to wane slightly over the next couple of seasons if he does stay. So, all of a sudden, that guaranteed sort of 30 goals in all competitions that you're going to get from Mo Salah is probably going to diminish, and then you're therefore relying on other people in the forward line to step up, and Diaz would be one of those players. So I'd be excited to see what he'd be like under a new manager, and the same goes probably for most of Liverpool's squad. I think having someone else come in, maybe a new system, and a little bit of time to work with him in pre-season as well. Obviously the Copa America might affect that a little bit, but yeah, I think we've definitely not seen the best of Luis Diaz yet. Just remains to be seen whether he can reach that peak at Liverpool.
Absolutely, and as you touched on then, it does feel like quite a strange situation to find yourself, that Liverpool kind of find themselves in, because even you say then Mohamed Salah, who's been at the club for 7 years now and scored 25, 30 goals in every one of those seasons. Even his future now feels a bit uncertain, and even someone like Nunez, who was only a big arrival 2 years ago, it feels like there isn't really apart from the goalkeeper and in Art and Alisson. Apart from that, I mean, Trent and Van Dijk, their contract situations are set to be, they need addressing one way or another. You'd obviously hope that they're able to find agreements in the not too distant future, but there's no one really in the squad who you'd say is kind of nailed on, if that makes sense. Their future's all up in the air one way or another. I mean, as you say then with Salah, there's obviously been more talk of a big money bid from Saudi Arabia, and whether that materialises like it did last summer. I throw the same question to you as I did with Diaz. Is there a world in which you would allow Mohamed Salah to leave Liverpool this summer?
I think it's one of those things. I think if an insane amount of money came in for him and he was willing to leave, because obviously that's another consideration as well. I think a lot of people sort of say, well, if Saudi bid X amount, then you've got to let him go. It's up to the player whether he wants to leave at that point as well. I mean, he's still under contract for a year. He'd be well within his rights to say, I don't want to go there. The money's not right. The deal's not right. And I don't particularly think, and I've said this for a little while, I don't think Salah would want to move to Saudi at this point in his career. I think he's still too much of a competitor to want to go over there. I think, if anything, I think he'd maybe rather go over to the States in a couple of years, or in a similar mould to Lionel Messi and what he's done over there. But I just think it's so difficult, because based off the second half of the season, you'd say, well, if a decent amount of money came in for Salah, you would let him go and you'd reinvest that money. But he is a guarantee of goals, and even when he wasn't at his best last season, he was still the club's top scorer. So I think unless you can bring someone in who is almost guaranteed to get you upwards of 20 goals in all competitions, then you've got to try and keep hold of him. And one of my favourite things about Mo is I think he is very much committed to the club. I think pretty much every summer since he's been here, he's been linked with moves away, and he's never really pushed to or never tried to really sort of fan the flames of that interest. And I think it's quite rare, having grown up with Fernando Torres and Luis Suarez, and it feels like every time Liverpool have had like a genuine superstar at the club, it's been a stepping stone. Even Felipe Coutinho obviously goes off to Barcelona, so it feels quite, I think it's something that Salah doesn't get enough credit for, really. The fact that he's been arguably one of the biggest players on the planet, a complete global superstar, probably only behind Lionel Messi and Ronaldo, and yet he's been more than happy to spend his peak years at Liverpool. And I think that's something, when he leaves the club, that actually he'll get a lot more credit for. So I'd be keen to keep him. I'd be keen to keep him beyond next summer. Be interesting to see how he fares, next season, whether it is maybe just a bit of a hangover from his injury that maybe hampered him in the latter stages of the season. But I'd be excited to see how he does. Maybe even positionally, will there be a bit of a change there? Will he go into more of a central role like Sadio Mane did in that final season before he left to go to Bayern Munich? So I'd be keen to keep Salah. He'd be on my keep list, I think.
It's interesting that you say that about Salah, because 12 months ago, I think not just Liverpool, but loads of top clubs in Europe would have been really worried about what was happening in Saudi Arabia in terms of how they were shaking up the market. I mean, Benzema went there, he was just on course to, he just won the Ballon d'Or. Obviously Ronaldo had gone there a few months before. Even young stars like Gavi from Celta Vigo, that he had gone there. So it was like players of all generations were trading in their careers, whether they be at one end or another. But it feels like now I agree with you on that. I don't think there is a market for Salah, because you look at the clubs in Europe who potentially be in need of someone like Salah. I mean, PSG is probably the only club at the moment. Obviously loads would take him, but in terms of the finances that Liverpool would demand, and considering how they've moved away from that kind of Galactico, I'm not saying Salah's like a big ego, but in terms of how PSG have, after Neymar, Messi and Mbappe, they've kind of gone for a more a more team approach rather than individuals. Also the finances of that for a player at that stage of his career. I mean, they signed Ramos from Benfica, I think, for 88 million euros last summer, and I think they already want to get rid of him, so I think they're more cautious than they're spending this year. obviously traditionally you'd have Barcelona and Real Madrid. Obviously Real Madrid have just got Mbappe. Barcelona, well documented financial problems, and then it's Saudi Arabia, isn't it? But would Salah want to go there, as you would say? I mean, the thing I always like about Salah is, and I mean this in the nicest possible way if he is listening, I think he always has like a chip on his shoulder, like someone to prove, whether that be, having won, his first season comes, they get to the Champions League finals really well. Second season he goes one better, wins the Champions League. After that he helps Liverpool win the league title. He always kind of comes back and he has like a message to prove. He never kind of rests on his laurels, and I think he'll be looking at this now thinking there's a new manager, it's a new test, it's a chance to kind of lead a new team forward again. There's loads of young players, they'll be in their second season, but I think he'll relish that opportunity. So while people may look at it and think this year is his seventh season at Liverpool, it's probably one of his most exciting that he'll be looking at, because he thinks, people are probably writing me off, there's been loads of talk, I'm in the final year of my contract, I'm either going to be playing for a contract at Liverpool or I'm playing for a contract elsewhere. So I think we could get a kind of a reignited Mo Salah this year, because of the final 10 games of the season, as we said, for so much of this Liverpool team, whether they were kind of all collectively burnt out, he just wasn't the same. And, part of that, I do wonder whether he was fit, because obviously he was injured at the African Cup of Nations and he never really recovered from that. I mean, he had the cameo at Brentford where he was electric, and that must have been, February time. But after that, obviously he missed a cup final, and then he just never really got back to it. And obviously, if you go further back to the season, there was the game against Newcastle at Anfield just before he left for AFCON, where again everyone was thinking, we're going to miss this guy. And those were the heights that he kind of showed that he can still hit those levels. He can still dominate games. He can goals, assists, you name it. He's kind of doing it all. But I just think, he needs to kind of hit those levels again, doesn't he?
Yeah, I do think if he does opt to stay beyond sort of the end of next season, I think the club need to maybe have a difficult conversation with him about international duty. I mean, obviously he's the captain of Egypt. He relishes the chance to play for his country, and rightly so. But it does seem to be that whenever he has gone off on international duty, and particularly when he's gone off to AFCON, he's come back and he's struggled to sort of find the pace and shake that off. And I do think if he's 32 now. So 31, he turns 32 later this month, doesn't he? On Saturday, I believe.
Yeah,
he's got the same
scary
birthday.
How you know that.
He's got the same birthday as my mum, which is why I know when his birthday is. So, I think, the new manager potentially needs to sit down and say, well, listen, you've got to decide, do you want to be at your, the peak of your powers in Europe, or do you want to still be playing for your country? Because he's getting to that stage now where I'm not really sure you can have both. Yeah. It is the first time we've seen him really sidelined with a muscle injury, isn't it, this season? So I think that is maybe a difficult conversation that they'll need to have with him, and I'm sure he'll be keen to carry on playing for Egypt. But I do think he's maybe, especially if he wants a big money deal at Liverpool, he's maybe got to make a little bit of a compromise there.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously you had the African Cup of Nations in January. There's also the Olympics later this summer, so that could, impact kind of how strong he starts the new season, how strong he starts, the new regime at Liverpool. And I'm sure as the new manager coming in on slot, he won't want his star player away until, 2 weeks before the start of the season. And then all of a sudden you're having to assess him and rush him back. And you know what it's like with a player. If you kind of start the season on the back foot, you're almost playing catch up, aren't you? And then you throw Champions League Cup games in there, you never really recover. So no, I think he can definitely he definitely has to make that decision. And I think with Liverpool as well, I think both of them this summer they'll need to kind of settle what next summer looks like, because I'm sure Liverpool is as good as Salah's been, and I'm sure whenever he does leave the club, he'll go with everyone's well wishes. But at the same time, from a sporting point of view, you've got a player there who's worth at least 60-70 million pounds in today's market. So if Salah's saying, well, I'm not going to sign a new deal, or I'm only going to do a 1 year, that kind of, it weakens Liverpool's hands almost. So if I'm Liverpool, I'm saying this summer, look, I want a 2 year. When you sign a 2 year deal, or you go in this summer, we're going to cash in, because in a world of PSR sanctions and how tight all that is, I just don't think Liverpool could afford to miss out on kind of getting some money back for Salah. Yeah,
no, I completely agree, and I think Trent the same. I think Trent is probably, he's obviously off with the Euros now, so it feels like obviously his contract isn't going to be settled until after he returns from that, possibly into next season. Maybe he wants to wait to have conversations with the new manager about where he fits in with the team. I'm sure we'll get onto that a bit more later on, but and he'd be well within his rights to sort of say he wants to give it a little bit of time just to see where the direction the club is headed in. but that leaves Liverpool in a very difficult position. And I think, with his age, and he's probably one of the most coveted players in all of Europe. So I don't think the club can afford to let him go for free. So I think getting him tied down to a new deal, as much as obviously it'd be great to see him stay at the club, but from a financial perspective as well, in the same way as Mo Salah, I don't think the club can or will.
You can't afford to go into January, can you? With these clubs having
absolutely
that
not.
1st of January date where they can agree pre-contracts and all that. But I'm sure, as a caveat, I'm sure it's very much just Liverpool, a changing of the guard with Richard Hughes coming in as sporting director. And you'd like to think that contract negotiations for Trent, Van Dijk, and Salah, one of the top things they do on his kind of to-do list. But moving on, we're going to stay with the forwards just to finish it off. That department. So we're looking at Darwin Nunez. I mean, Beth, I don't really know how to sum up Darwin Nunez, and he's been here for 2 seasons now. I think it's almost quite a difficult conversation because obviously he's such a fan favourite, and everyone wants him to do well. But then I think you almost have to separate that between Darwin Nunez as a person and the footballer, because as a person you can't fault him for what he does on the pitch and tries to give his all. But as the footballer, having paid 65 million up front, that can rise to 85 million pounds. You do want to see a bit more from him, and it feels like this season he really did step up for I don't know, 2/3 of the season. But again, as we said with Salah, as we said with Diaz, he maybe just let himself down when Liverpool were in the decisive moments. Yeah,
I think it is so hard to judge everyone based on sort of the last few months of the season, because it was just a collective malaise and no one really, barring maybe Harvey Elliott, stepped up and really sort of took the initiative. So, he certainly wasn't on his own. I think the one thing I've been slightly frustrated with is, I don't think I can recall a player who's been supported as much certainly by the match-going fan base as Darwin Nunez has. Whenever he's missed a chance, he's got more support than I think maybe anyone else in the squad. So I think sort of some of the stuff over the last month or two with him sort of deleting all of his Liverpool pictures,
very
and
petty, isn't
it does feel a little bit like he's maybe being misguided in terms of maybe whoever's in his ear. And I think someone needs to have a word with him and sort of say, cut all of that stuff out, because, it'd be a shame if he does end up leaving the club, whether it be this summer, whether it be next summer, whether he stays. You don't want to sort of have a fractured relationship with a fan base that have really supported you. So hopefully all that gets quashed. I really like him. It feels like, like you say, it's a bit of a tired conversation really, because I feel like nearly every pod we've done for the last 2 seasons, we've been saying, 1 week he's been brilliant, the next week he's been sort of ridiculous, squandering really easy chances and then scoring the most sublime goals. So I think you've got to again look at what else is out there in the market. I mean, Darwin, he's 24, is he 24, just turned 25? So again, he's still not quite at his peak yet. So you've got to think like other players in Europe of his age. Who are you going to get to come in for a decent transfer fee that's not too extortionate and score 20 goals in all competitions? So it is a tricky one. I think if he can just get a little bit more consistency, then he could be some player for Liverpool. We've seen him for Uruguay, sort of banging the goals in, and he always seems to look, to me, so much more composed when he plays for Uruguay. I don't know if that's just maybe he feels more at home, whether it's the system a little bit more. So yeah, I think if he can get a bit of consistency, then I still think he's got a future at Liverpool. But it does also feel like we've been saying that for the last 2 years. So yeah, it remains to be seen, I think, whether he's got what it takes to really sort of step up to the plate.
And as I suppose it's one for the new manager coming in, is like, you look at him as a striker and he's got everything that you want really in terms of he's good in the air, he's quick. He's improved his off the ball game in recent times, and his pressing's got better. But it just feels like that decisive moment, as we've said for so long, is kind of just evading him at the wrong points. I think in the time that we last done a pod, it was the 4-on-2 at Old Trafford, wasn't it? Where he probably any other striker, who's got a good goal bonus on their contract is putting their laces through that, aren't they? And he kind of unselfishly tries to square it back to Szoboszlai or whoever, and in the end you're just kind of scratching your head thinking, oh my god, but if that pass is better, maybe Liverpool score, and then you're thinking, that's Firmino-esque kind of thing. So it's kind of sliding doors moments with Nunez. But I think when I was kind of compiling this list, he would rank higher to keep than Diaz. I think Liverpool have kind of gone through the hard teething stages with him, and even if someone was to come in and offer offer the money back of 60 odd million. I mean, obviously it'd be a hard conversation, but I almost think that like if you were to let go of him now, someone else would kind of reap the rewards of what you've been through and kind of all that teething process.
And I think it's difficult because if you're looking off sort of this season, you're looking at Ollie Watkins and, the amount of goals that he scored this season. Dominic Solanke has had an incredible individual season. You look at even some of the money that Ivan Toney is being touted to leave Brentford for, having, obviously not played for half of the season and only scored sort of 5-6 goals since he returned from injury. So, it's strikers are going for big money at this moment in time, and some of those players like Ollie Watkins, like Dominic Solanke, they've had the best seasons of the career. I think Solanke's 26 maybe, and Ollie Watkins is obviously a little bit older than that. So you think Nunez is, he could still come good. Strikers, they can have seasons later on in the career where they really burst into life. So I do get what you mean. I think it sort of feels like if you give up on him now, he could still go elsewhere.
It's the wrong time, isn't it? Yeah.
But I do think, and I think we maybe said this last season as well, but I think next season really is make or break for him. I thought it was interesting as well, sort of when Slot was appointed, a lot of the briefings included things about, he's really excited to work with Nunez, so it didn't sound like a player who's going to be out of the door anytime soon. But I think next season will be make or break for him.
Absolutely. And just we'll start the other end of the pitch now. So Kelleher's another player who's there's been lots of speculation, it feels like forever, about his future. Played the most games he's ever played in the season for Liverpool last term. Obviously Alisson was out injured for a large part of that, but again, cup final at Wembley, he delivered the big moments and helped Liverpool win that. He's 25 years old now, and I think every time he goes on international duty, he's kind of urged that maybe he should consider his future at Liverpool. He's kind of done the unglamorous role of being a second choice goalkeeper, and now maybe it's time to go and establish himself at a lower Premier League side. I mean, teams that have been, Forest had a bid for him in January, rejected. It's difficult. He's got 2 years left on his deal. I mean, what would constitute a good deal for Liverpool this summer, or are you kind of just saying, unless he kicks up an absolute force, he's got to stay?
I think it's such a difficult one because I think you're sort of conflicted between sort of your heart and your head. I think sort of from a human perspective, I think he needs to leave the club because he deserves to be playing week in, week out as a number one goalkeeper. But your head sort of tells you that Alisson is quite injury prone for a goalkeeper. He's rarely had a season at Liverpool that's been completely unblemished by injury. I mean, you look at sort of Jordan Pickford at Everton by comparison, and it feels like it's only the odd cup game that he doesn't play. Whereas for Liverpool, obviously it was a bit different last season with it being the Europa League, but Alisson obviously misses quite a few games with injury, and Kelleher steps up at the perfect moment. And with Alisson, obviously getting older as well, you think of those muscle injuries going to become even more common, and if they do, then you need a solid number two. And I think I'm a big fan of Kelleher. I think he's not quite at Alisson's level yet, but I still think he's got enormous potential. I still don't think we've seen the best of him. I think finding a number two goalkeeper must be one of the most difficult tasks in football, because you need someone of a certain quality, but also someone who's happy to sort of sit on the bench.
The right balance,
so I think if he didn't kick up a fuss, I'd be more than happy to keep him. But I also think, if a decent offer comes in, and I'm talking sort of 30 million and upwards, then I think you'd have to maybe consider letting him go. But I think certainly he will command, when you look at the money some other goalkeepers have gone for, I think he would command, for me, a fee of about 30 million or more.
Absolutely. I'm going to fire through some of the younger names on the list now. So we've got Bobby Clark, another one who will remember that afternoon at Wembley. We've got obviously Ben Doak, who had a kind of a really disrupted season. He didn't play for Liverpool since December. Was obviously called up to the Scotland squad for Euro 2024, but obviously had to pull out. And we've got James McConnell. On those three, what are you doing? Obviously, they're not sales, are they? They're loans or keeps. But...
Yeah, I think I'd be leaning more towards a loan. Certainly for Ben Doak, I think It's such a shame for him because he came in, there was so much excitement about him coming in and he'd been talked up so much, and we've seen flashes of that, and sort of felt like last season was going to be the season where we saw him really given an opportunity in the Europa League and some of the cup games, and he obviously picks up an injury, spends a lot of time on the sidelines, and then just when you're thinking, right, this summer might kickstart his career a little bit more, going to the Euros, he has to withdraw through injury. So it does feel like that's sort of the story of his career at this moment in time. And you think about the demands of playing in the Premier League. Is he someone who can be relied upon to play, to really play a big role in this squad? Maybe not. I think maybe going out to somewhere in the Championship or even sort of lower end of the Premier League where he's going to play a little bit more often and get up to speed with the pace and the physicality of the league, I don't think would be too bad an idea. I think Bobby Clark, for me, out of the youngsters, certainly in midfield, looks like maybe he could be the most ready to sort of step up and take on a little bit of a role in the squad. But it does also feel like we've got a little bit of a surplus in midfield in terms of, you've got Curtis Jones, you've got Szoboszlai, you've got Alexis McAllister, you've got Wataru Endo, you've got Harvey Elliott who can play in there, Carvalho, who's someone we might touch on in a minute. Then you're thinking potentially Liverpool look to bring in a defensive midfielder. If Trent Alexander-Arnold pushes into midfield, all of a sudden you've got 6, 7, 8 players pushing for 2 or 3 positions. So I do think if a good loan maybe towards the bottom end of the Premier League came in for Bobby Clark, it might not be the worst thing.
Even if it was like a 6-month thing.
Yeah, and reassess it in January and see, or maybe the reverse of that, you keep him around for the first 6 months of the season. If it doesn't, he doesn't play too often, then maybe loan him out as they did with Carvalho to Hull in the January. So, and McConnell again, I think he's looked good when we've seen him. I think the sad thing for the likes of Clark and McConnell is they obviously sort of really stepped up when Liverpool needed them to, didn't they? And then the big guns come back towards the end of the season and the youngsters are sort of pushed off, to a role on the bench, and obviously it doesn't work out for Liverpool anyway, and you almost think, what would have happened if Klopp would have stuck with those young players. But yeah, I just think when you look at the other options that Liverpool have got, when everyone is fit, of course, because we know that Liverpool don't,
injuries.
They are plagued by injuries pretty much every season. So, I'm sure if those players stick around, they will get the chance, whether that be in a cup competition or whatever. But I just think when you look at the other options they've got, when everyone is fit, they're going to be sort of 4th, 5th, 6th choice. And so for that reason, for their development, I think if the right loan option were to come up, we've seen it work with, the likes of Tyler Morton, with Harvey Elliott, with Jarell Quansah as well. So loan for me, I think, if the right option were available.
Absolutely, and I suppose for a lot of them as well, it's a clean slate. I mean, the likes of Bobby Clark probably and James McConnell, they probably don't want that after how much credit they had under Jurgen Klopp. But players you just touched on there, obviously Fabio Carvalho did really well at Hull City in the second half of the season. Tyler Morton had another really good loan spell in the Championship. You've got Jadon Danns, you've got Lewis Kumas, you've got Cade Gordon, you've got all these youngsters who, especially with big international tournaments going on this summer, the Copa America and the Euros and even the Olympics at that stage, they're going to get opportunities to impress in pre-season, and there will be minutes for them to be had, and there'll be no kind of prejudging from Slot, will there? He'll be like, kind of take them at face value. If they perform in pre-season, you'd imagine they'll be kept around, and unless there was some really good offers to come in. But it does feel like a really exciting time for Liverpool, like quietly these youngsters have kind of drip-fed through to the first team, doesn't it? Yeah,
definitely. And I think that's why, in a way, as much as I'm sure they'll have been really disappointed for Curtis Jones and Jarell Quansah not getting, called up to the final squad for the Euros is maybe a good thing, because, as much as I'm sure it would have been a great experience, realistically, they probably wouldn't have played, or they wouldn't have played a lot. And so I think they might actually be better served being able to have a little bit of a rest and then be there first day of pre-season, ready to impress the new manager and get up to speed. And I think Carvalho is an interesting one, because he's obviously done very well in the second half of the season. It feels quite a strange one with him, because I remember sort of the January when Liverpool were linked with him, and it sort of felt like a big disaster that Liverpool didn't get him, and everyone was really disappointed.
They were like top of the Premier League at the point, going,
Yeah, exactly. And then so there felt like there was a big build-up for him to come. He obviously comes in the summer, scores that last-minute winner against Newcastle, and then after that is sort of left out in the cold a little bit. Probably didn't cover himself in glory, every time he made an appearance, but it almost felt like the way that Jurgen Klopp played didn't really suit him, and it never really felt like there was much love lost between him and Jurgen Klopp. I think some of the things that he's come out and said, and I just sort of wonder whether for him having a new manager at the club, potentially playing in a 4-2-3-1 might actually suit him if he plays in that number 10, plays behind the striker. I don't know if that be something in pre-season certainly to have a look at. I'm sure he won't be short of offers, whether that be on loan, whether that be in the Championship. I'm sure Hull would love him back for another season. So all of those things probably have to be considered. But he's a player who I think, if he was sort of playing every week in the Championship, he's probably a player that Liverpool would be looking at, would be linked with, other Premier League clubs would be linked with. So I think it'll be interesting to see what he's like in pre-season.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at someone like Somerville and kind of the numbers he's put up for Leeds this season, kind of perfect example. Leeds didn't, get promoted to the Premier League in the end, and all of a sudden you've got clubs like Liverpool sniffing around. And Carvalho, as you say, if he wasn't affiliated with Liverpool, if he was just purely a Hull player, and they missed out on the plaïoffs on the final day, you'd be like, well, that's someone you can kind of get for a relatively cheap sum. I think it's interesting, as you say, because I remember he scored against Bournemouth. Obviously scored the goal against Newcastle. He scored away at City in one of the cup games as well, and then was kind of subbed off at half time. So there was his performances weren't great as a whole, but he almost kind of quietly delivered. He scored, he got assists, and as you say, it's interesting because it feels like there's a supremely talented player there, but maybe just the wrong system. I know a few times, I think in the derby as well at Goodison, Klopp played him and Elliott in midfield. There was the game at Forest as well a few weeks later, and you could just tell physically he wasn't up to the standard. But to throw someone of that age in at the Championship is kind of like, I always think the physicality level between the Premier League and the Championship, obviously I've never played in either of them, just caveat that, but it doesn't look like a too big of a jump really. It's more kind of the technical aspects of the Premier League which makes it so huge. But from a physical presence, playing Tuesday, Saturday, kind of making your body really robust and all that kind of things, that would have done him really, really well. And as you say, it's just now hopefully the new manager, hopefully there's somewhere where you can kind of slot him in and get him into, pardon the pun, but get
Is that intentional?
Not at all. But maybe find a way into the team for him, because he feels like he's one of those where he could go and reignite his career somewhere else. Then in 3 or 4 years' time, you might be looking at him and thinking, he was the one that got away. And Liverpool haven't really had too many of those really in recent times, have they? But yeah, he's a really exciting player for sure. Just a few more to finish off with them before we touch on Trent Alexander-Arnold. I'm going to ask for one word answers on these. Nat Phillips.
Sell.
Kostas Tsimikas.
I noticed that you've got him on the sell list. I think certainly if the right offer came in, then you'd let him go. And I also think, if the player himself were to push for a move, which you would think, he's a full Greek international, and he plays a bit more of a starring role for his country. You might think that you might want to play a little bit more frequently on a domestic level. Again, it's sort of a bit like the backup goalkeeper thing. I think getting sort of people in reserve positions is such a difficult job, because they need to be of a certain quality that they can come in and do a job, but also that they're going to be happy sort of being a good character around the group and sitting on the bench and not kicking up a fuss, which it feels like Tsimikas is. I think, we've got to remember sort of two of Liverpool's latest cup triumphs in the FA Cup in 2022. Tsimikas scores the decisive penalty.
He's front and centre, isn't he?
Yeah, he sets up the winner for Virgil van Dijk in the League Cup final. So I don't mind him at all, and I think he has had some really good games for Liverpool.
I think he's always better when he's had a string of games, isn't he?
And that's the thing, isn't it? That's the tricky thing for players who are playing sort of backup, because the chances are you're probably not going to get a massive string of games. You're probably going to be relied upon here or there, and is any player going to be at the best when they're like that? So again, it as well probably depends on what the manager wants positionally going forward. You bring in another centre back that can also play left back, in which case you might be free to let him go. Do you look at maybe trying to find a long-term successor for Andy Robertson, who's obviously getting on a little bit? So I think like probably a lot of these players, if the money was right and the player wanted to move, then he's certainly not irreplaceable. Yeah. But I also think he's a solid squad player, and you've got to think for the right money, who else is out there that is going to come in and do the same job that he does in terms of sort of being happy to play a bit of a supporting role.
Absolutely. I think the Gomez situation was kind of a bit of a sliding door moments for his season, wasn't it? I mean, Ian Doyle's done his kind of end of season ratings, and he mentions it in his piece today. So obviously, Robertson gets injured on international duty. Tsimikas has a run of games, does quite well, and then it's the game against Arsenal, isn't it, where Saka collides with Tsimikas and Klopp, and Tsimikas does his collarbone, shoulder, whatever it was, and then Liverpool have got no left backs. They recall Owen Beck, then Gomez plays. Gomez does really well, and that feels like a turning point for Gomez this season as well. All of a sudden, he's reignited as this kind of utility man, and then Tsimikas comes in, and I think he only plays 20 minutes in the Premier League between then and the end of the season, and it's kind of like, if he was able to stay fit, would Robertson have had a real fight on his hands to kind of dislodge him? And obviously that wasn't really the case. But
because Tsimikas played against City, didn't he, at the Etihad?
Yes, yeah.
And he did exceptionally well in that game, so I think he's definitely got it in him. But like you say, it's just maybe things haven't always fallen into place with him in terms of staying fit when Robertson's not been fit. And
it is interesting, isn't it? Because obviously we'll touch on Trent in a second, but with Conor Bradley, you'd imagine. Well, if Trent is going to start in midfield for Liverpool next season, then you'd imagine Conor Bradley will be the fullback. Then I think you almost kind of disregard Joe Gomez as a centre half, and he just becomes your fullback cover, doesn't he? Yeah. Right and left back. You play a decent amount of games every season. You're probably bringing another centre half as well. So I think in that case, Liverpool could maybe afford to lose him. But then you've obviously think Gomez has had his injury issues in the past, hasn't he? But going on to Trent, then he played in England's 3-0 win over Bosnia at Newcastle last week, played in midfield, earned some huge praise, should I say, from the media, players, fans and everyone. It looks now like he's going to start England's first Euro 2024 game this weekend against Serbia. That looks like it's going to come in midfield. That feels like quite a big moment for, obviously, it's kind of huge for him to have Southgate's trust, because he's never really had that, has he? But is this something that we can see going forward at Liverpool, or is it just Southgate maybe looking for a way to kind of get the edge on the top teams like France, Italy and Germany?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. Like you say, I don't think he's ever been trusted fully by Southgate. Certainly at right back, he's always favoured the more defensive minded players like Kyle Walker, and my mind always goes back to that interview that I think it was
Gabriel Clark, was it?
Yeah, it was a Channel 4 interview, or an ITV interview, I can't remember who it was, where they sort of sat Trent down and basically sort of grilled him on his defending in a way that I've never really seen them, grill.
Yeah, serial
killers. They were quite brutal, and it sort of felt like that reflected and sort of encapsulated what Trent's international career has been to date. A lot of it has been negative. A lot of it has been, him receiving criticism for making mistakes that, other players probably make, but just don't get the headlines as much. And it feels like in that game at St James's Park the other week, there was sort of a real flash of what he could do. He obviously scores a great goal. There was a clip going sort of viral of that pass, the Diaz off
Gerrard-esque, wasn't it?
Yeah, to Grealish. And I think he brings something that I don't think any other player that England have got or Liverpool have got brings. So I think it will be interesting to see. I think it looks like he maybe is going to start in that double pivot alongside Declan Rice, which is potentially where the sort of role that he might play if he were to move into midfield for Liverpool. So it'll be interesting to see how he fares there. He's obviously got the number 8 shirt, which probably again indicates that the manager sees him as being a key part of this team and the starting 11. I think it's maybe a tournament that it could be. I don't want to say it could be the making of him, because he's already one of the best in the world, but I just sort of think
him and kind
redefine him and how he's viewed it from sort of, obviously I think Liverpool fans know how good he is, and I've always been of the opinion that whatever his defensive deficiencies, which I always think are a bit over exaggerated anyway, I think you'd much rather sacrifice that a little bit to just have him and what he can bring in the team. And I think maybe the whole country might sort of start to realise that if he is to have a good tournament for England. So it's probably as well, it's a chance for him to maybe make his case to the new manager that this is where he should be playing from now on, and really make that midfield role his own. I think he now sees himself as a midfielder. I think as much as he might come out and say, I'm happy to play anywhere, and I'm sure he is happy.
No one wants to be Gary Neville, do they?
They don't. But yeah, I do think, and I've said this a couple of times on the Blood Red pod, over the last couple of months, I just sort of think if he is to move into midfield for Liverpool, then I think he's got to move into midfield. I think this sort of hybrid, inverted fullback thing, I just don't think that works really for Liverpool. I think it leaves whoever's playing alongside him at centre-back very vulnerable. I think Liverpool were caught out quite a bit with that. I think especially when you consider you've got Mo Salah on that right-hand side, who, is sometimes a little bit culpable of not tracking back. So I think you do there needs to be clarity. I think I don't want to be sat here in another year's time saying, where's Trent's best position?
International break.
Yeah, is he a midfielder? Is he a right back? I think a decision has to be made either way, and probably how he plays at the Euros might shape that a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, it is really exciting, isn't it? Because, as you say, that Liverpool and Liverpool fans know how good he is, but this kind of feels like, if you are to say Liverpool 2.0, it could be Trent 2.0. I mean, we've seen over the last 13, 14 months that he's played in this new hybrid role, and as you say, it's worked at times, and there's been flashes of him being more devastating in central areas in the final third. But I think in the back of, certainly in my mind, to be fair, and I think Klopp's as well, he's probably always thought, I conquered England, Europe and the world with Trent at fullback, with Robertson at fullback. But then I think now you look at it and you think, well, Robertson's probably not got that many years left. Obviously, he's a new manager. Maybe it's time to just, freshen things up and tweak that, because I think the reality of it is that Robertson won't be able to play week in, week out. I think that's why I think the left-back position is in terms of a deputy, is so important. Obviously, you've got Conor Bradley coming through, who isn't just like an adequate 5 out of 10, Nathaniel Klein-esque, you can kind of slot in. He's an attacking force, and we've kind of seen how fearless he is and how creative he can be, and how devastating he can be going in the final third. So I think it's almost like, I don't think Liverpool's hand's been forced, but it's almost like they've got no excuses now, because you can't say, well, there isn't a right back that can do what Trent does. Mm-hmm. And obviously I know him and Conor Bradley are different, but they kind of, attacking output wise, I don't think you lose too much in terms of the drop off from Trent to Bradley, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think Bradley, certainly that sort of stint when he first came into the team after Christmas, he was exceptional, wasn't he? And that Chelsea game was the pinnacle of that, and he's bursting forward and he gets his goal. And I think obviously then he has a really difficult situation off the pitch in his personal life that kept him out for a little bit, and he comes back to a team that aren't really firing on all cylinders. So I still don't think we've seen the best of him, and I think he's a really exciting prospect. And it felt like for a long while you're sort of thinking, well, who can come in and do what Trent does? And I think Bradley will have his own take on that role, certainly, but can very much offer that attacking presence that Trent has been able to command over the past few seasons. He reminds me of
early Trent in terms of like going on the outside, doesn't he? And if you were to say Trent, he kind of split his Liverpool career into two halves. Obviously, you've probably got the league title win onwards, and then you've got, from like 2017 until they won the league title. In that first half, he was, it was him and Robertson, high flying fullbacks, wasn't it? You get the likes of Henderson and Wijnaldum tucking in for them, and I think Bradley's a player who would have thrived in that kind of position. Having someone like Henderson alongside him who could slot in and kind of give him that freedom and that license to go up and down the wing. And yeah, I just think you look at it now, and I just think it really is time. And I think for Slot as well, you talk about kind of taking the job, and it's a clean slate for everyone. But in terms of him, he's not got kind of any prejudice with Trent's position, as he of, well, I've done that and it worked, and we've won that and it's worked. It's like, if Trent goes and bosses the Euros, and you'd imagine if Trent does well, England will do well. They got to I think the semi-finals is probably the bare minimum that England team should be, be looking to get. Obviously, it depends on the draws and stuff, but I think any earlier exit would be really disappointing for them. And there's every chance, if you get to that stage of the competition, Trent is probably one of the best players. If you're Arne Slot, you're not going to think, well, I'm going to put him really close to the touchline now and make him almost ineffective in game. So I think he'll be really excited, and it's almost like a dress rehearsal for him before he has to make his kind of big decision at Liverpool, because I think, as you say, I think there needs to be clarity one way or another on his position this season. Yeah,
I think definitely. I think if Trent were to have a brilliant tournament in midfield, it would be slightly perplexing for a new manager to come in and stick him back at right back. So it feels like a big summer for Trent, and hopefully it does bring a little bit of clarity for Liverpool, because I don't think it's really benefiting anyone having him going between roles, and it leaves Liverpool too open at the back and doesn't really cater to Trent's talents as well as it could do. So yeah, exciting few weeks ahead.
I suppose as well, just on a final point is that, and kind of another big transfer talk is that everyone knows that Liverpool need a defensive midfielder, and there is a real shortage of. You look at who Liverpool will be going up against, and I've said this on numerous pods. You're talking your Rodris, you're talking of your Declan Rices, and obviously Liverpool tried to kind of match that last season by going for Caicedo. It didn't work in the end, but we all know Liverpool kind of look for that. If the player isn't right, they won't just buy a player for the sake of it. They'll rather fix things in-house and tweak things. We saw that with James Milner when he played left-back for a full season. There wasn't a left-back out there, so Klopp was like, well, I'll make my own almost kind of thing. And it feels like it could almost be the perfect excuse that, there is no... Obviously, there will be some great defensive midfielders in other leagues across Europe, but there isn't really a standout candidate who you would say, Liverpool need him. He'll take them to the next level. And as I say, if Trent is able to kind of show that he can do that alongside someone like Declan Rice, who for me is probably one of the top 5 in the world in that position, I think it bodes really well for next season, doesn't it? Yeah,
definitely. And I think, from Trent's perspective, he's also got to show that he can do that defensive side of the game. Being in midfield isn't just about spraying, amazing passes left, right and centre. It's also about having a defensive awareness, obviously in a different way to playing at right back, but you need to put in the hard yards and show that you can be disciplined and positionally disciplined, and show that you can track back. And Declan Rice has been sort of the master of that this season. Rodri has sort of revolutionised that role, hasn't he? He's a force going forwards, but he's also so good in the tackle. And so I think Trent's got to prove that he can do that. It isn't just about the creative side, it is about the defensive side as well. And if he can show he can do that, then Liverpool will have some midfield player on the hands.
Absolutely, and if that all does go well, we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk all about that and rave about Trent's new Liverpool position. But in the meantime, that's myself, Keifer, MacDonald and Beth Lindop with this week's edition of Analysing Anfield. Thank you for watching.